Hi, and welcome to the Human Side of Business podcast. I'm Ange MacCabe, CEO and co-founder of Intuity Performance. I'm a performance coach, HR professional, whole person leadership facilitator, and your host. The Human Side of Business podcast is fueled by the genuine curiosity to understand how personal characteristics and skills can be leveraged to drive individual and team performance, tangible outcomes, and ultimately organizational success within business. Each podcast is devoted to sharing knowledge, expanding our learning edges, and exploring the trends in corporate culture towards growing the emotional intelligence of organizations. I'm so glad you're here. Hi, everyone, and a warm welcome to the Human Side of Business podcast. Today, we have a special group with us to focus in on a roundtable topic around ESG. So I'd like to go around the table and introduce ourselves before we dive deep. Carrie-Anne, let's start with you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Carrie-Anne McDougall. I'm a brand strategist and co-founder of the Insight Group. One of the many things that I'm very passionate about is helping organizations establish strong brand identities and then figure out how to align those values throughout their entire organizations. In the case of ESG, I'm really excited to be here to share some of the insights I'm seeing and also learn from everyone. There definitely seems to be a strong appetite to explore these principles deeply. And it's really nice to see leaders reaching out and recognizing that to adopt some of these principles, they might have to go back and revisit some of their values, mission, vision, purpose, and those activities to build a culture that really supports ESG. So I'm really happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me. And I look forward to hearing from everyone.
Awesome. Thank you, Carrie-Anne. So glad you're here. Shar.
Thank you.
Hi, Charlene Curry. I am efficiency expert and owner at Optimize Business Solutions and Services. We offer fractional leadership to service-based businesses looking to streamline their processes to create growth and capacity. I'm really excited to be here and talk ESG, to talk about the governance side of things and learn more on how people are integrating that piece of it and the transparency that's coming behind it, and the way that they're developing techniques for the transparency and measurement of the planning and comprehensive education for these aspects. So I'm excited to be here, and thank you very much, Ange. Looking forward to it.
Yes, thanks for being here, Shar. Mel.
Hi, everyone. I'm super excited to be here, Mel Brown. And I work as a leadership and team coach. And my background is a former business executive, which really helps me understand the worlds that my clients are living in. I have two firms. One is Elevate Performance Incorporated, and that really focuses on leadership development coaching and team coaching and engagement work. And then I co-founded last year a consortium of global coaches and consultants, which is really designed to drive large-scale organizational change, really thinking about the UN Sustainable Development Goals and the Interdevelopment Goals as well. I'm super excited to be here because from a systemic team coaching perspective, I really feel like there is a fit with ESG that perhaps clients and even myself as a coach haven't fully explored. And that's really about helping our teams, our clients think about widening their gaze so that they're not just focusing about an internal view of the team, but also externally with the team. So I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to learn from all of you. And thanks for having me, Ange.
My pleasure. So glad you're here, Mel. Thank you. Nancy.
Great. Thanks. Hi. And thanks again. This is going to be a great conversation. So my name is Nancy Foran, and I founded a boutique consulting firm, I guess, ESG Partners, about 3.5 to 4 years ago, and started ESG Partners based here in Atlanta, Canada, at a time when we talked about sustainability in business or having an impact or being able to measure our performance outside financial performance. Sometimes you'd have those conversations and they just were met with sort of blank stares. It wasn't a conversation we were having in a purposeful way here in Atlanta, Canada. And so since that time, we've done a lot of work in terms of capacity building and creating awareness and education. And now we find that a lot of clients are coming to us saying, we need to start taking this in a very holistic way. We need to start to understand what it is that's going to allow us to continue our social license to operate and make sure that we can ensure great transparency and have impact while also ensuring our sort of strong financial performance. So, it really is, when we talk about ESG and we talk about impact and we talk about some of these issues we're talking about, I expect today, it's all under that sort of umbrella that it's all about creating strong, sustainable businesses that will be here in the future to keep employing and supporting our communities. And so really, really excited to talk about this from that also, the coaching lens and from an internal cultural perspective. So yeah, anyway, I'll stop there.
Amazing. So glad you're here, Nancy. Sin, what about you?
Yeah, hi everyone, and it's phenomenal to be here. I'm Sin Sweeney. I use she/her pronouns. I'm the CEO and founder of Simply Good Form. We are a 2S LGBTQIA+ and gender equity inclusion consultancy. So we focus on creating space, building community, helping to support our clients with what happens when you get pronouns wrong. When I make a mistake, what do I do? Because inevitably you will make a mistake, but how we can all do better. And I think it really lends itself well to the ESG world, because we are socially focused in everything that we do, and helping to, one of our taglines would be building better humans one conversation at a time. And so it's, linking into being accountable, being transparent, but also simplifying. So I'm really excited to be here, because I think often a lot of people are feeling overwhelmed and they don't know where to start. And I think this can be a really good conversation in helping to deliver some simple tools that can be impactful and effective for just getting started right away within your organization to enhance your longevity and your capacity to thrive economically.
I'm excited to hear the words. Oh, my pleasure. So glad that you're here. And I'm excited to hear the words simple tools. But we'll pause there. So of course, I'm Ange MacCabe, CEO and founder of Intuity Performance. We're focused on the human side of business. And so what we do is we really focus on empowering leaders for tomorrow's breakthroughs through evidence-backed assessments and sustainable coaching and facilitation practices. So we're here, and we are super pumped to talk about ESG. So first question, just to kind of even that proverbial playing field across the board within our group and for our audiences, what does ESG mean to each one of us?
I feel like I shouldn't start because I live and breathe ESG, but everyone was sort of quiet, so I'll just pop right in. So for me, ESG is, it's a term that I think can be, it can sometimes be misinterpreted as it's a screening criteria for the investment community, or it's forcing a certain behavior. And for me, this is just a way of looking at business from a broader perspective and a more holistic lens than just the financial performance. Like my background, I am a CPA, I'm a chartered director. I've been living governance and accounting and finance for my entire career. We've talked about a whole bunch of different ways, triple bottom line and impact and all these sorts of things. But at the end of the day, if we don't focus on how our natural and social capital is being utilized and how we are affecting that externally, we won't be looking at how it might come back to us as a company. So all of this is just about how do we create strong, transparent companies or organizations at all levels, whether you're micro, small, medium, or large organization. How do you make sure you've got all of that embedded? And you also care about the environment that's around you and the social aspect of business, whether it be communities, your employees, how you treat people, how you ensure that there's an inclusive environment to work in. So every single person who comes to work every day can feel that they're heard and they're part of what you're trying to create and do. And you know what's going on in the communities around you. And as you go through that process, and as companies start to really lean into this and start to change the mindset, there will be a cultural shift. There needs to be. There will have to be a new tone set from the top that trickles through the organization. it can't be successful if it's not. And, and even just going back to the whole process piece, will processes have to change as you start to prioritize different aspects of how you do business? Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so it needn't be a bad or a good thing. This is where businesses create and maintain their social license to operate. And it's a really important conversation. So
powerful words, Nancy. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
If I might follow Nancy just for 1 second, thank you so much for that. And I always say, every time I get a chance to be with Nancy, it's always very passionate, and I'm always so inspired. So thank you so much for that. Your love for what you do is infectious. So appreciate that. I've always been, since I started my career, I started a marketing agency when I was 25, and I've always wanted to look past the financial impact of a business, but I never had language for that. And so that's why, it was really difficult for me. I would find myself working with organizations and companies and not understanding why I was lacking passion or why I was lacking excitement. And it really was because in those instances, perhaps it was more about the financial impact and less about everything else. But I didn't have the language. And I really thank ESG for framing this up. I mean, I'm still learning like everyone else, but I love that we have now something to call this, and that there's a call to attention around the importance of this. And that when you pay really close attention to your culture and to the people within your culture, and you have great leadership at the top leading from an inspired place, that financial impact will come, the sustainability will come, the things will come from that. But that for me, ESG is past the financial impact, but I'm just so grateful to actually have that language and the awareness for where that is coming from and what that means is heightening. And I think that's a really exciting time for organizations. And while it can sound daunting and very complex, I also think it can be a very empowering thing for leaders right now within organizations to say, you know what, you are going to have to walk the walk. So what is really important to you? What are those core values? What is your purpose? And how do we infiltrate that throughout the entire organization? And just a small, I was contracted recently to do, the symptom was customer service training. But ultimately that is a symptom of something greater. And it really was, a lack of sharing that vision and that purpose within that organization. And so it was spent very little time actually on the tactics of customer service training, and much more time on purpose and vision and impact and what we're doing in the community. And by the end of this training, you can imagine they were less than excited to walk into it because it was mandated training. But on the way out, they felt something, and you could feel a movement start to create. So that's my take on ESG and why I'm so excited to be learning about this and helping organizations to adopt this.
If I can hop in.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Charlene.
The purpose and meaning is really massive for me. I have always been a believer that you shouldn't go to work every day and hate what you do. There should be a piece there. So purpose and meaning, a positive work environment, innovation and growth, community engagement, health and well-being, and long-term stability all come from putting ESG into places. I think maybe Nancy said earlier, the profitability comes at the end of that. And it's obviously what was focused on for a very long time. But putting all of these other pieces in order and getting people to not just play in an environment they're passionate about, but work in an environment that they're passionate about really aligns everybody and everything in all of their day-to-day. I think you will produce better work, you will care more, and giving them a purpose. So I think bringing all of these things together is the whole point of what's happening here. And I really love that.
Yeah, if I can hop in, I love the words that you're all sharing here, like language and knowing the language, leadership from the top down, feeling that movement and having a purpose and a value. I know so I grew up actually in a family business, small family floral business with greenhouses and growers in the small community. And, that sense of pride of feeling like you're connecting with community. It went beyond like what we did within the business, but how we interacted with the community around us. And then have worked with some large corporates in fashion, media, television, and then ran a business in tourism before starting Simply Good Form, which is, completely different. So I've worked in a lot of different industries and have really felt like for me, the most rewarding bit is that how can you connect with what you're doing with the community? Slow travel. How can you travel making less of an impact around you within, Simply Good Form with what we're doing? It's, making sure that our hiring practices are equitable. We've got a lot of ADHD in our office. And I can say, for one, I was a pretty difficult person to hire because I just didn't do well in interviews. I am not a good interview person generally. And most people that have come to work with me are the same. And so looking at those processes that are in place and how can you open that space to attract and retain, because we know that when you bring people into a company and they don't feel valued, with us focusing on trans and non-binary inclusion, some of the best ideas will come from the diverse voices. And yet, if you don't feel valued, not only will you leave, and you're going to incur that cost for retraining, rehiring, but those that don't leave are going to withhold some of probably the best ideas that they could bring to the table because they don't feel valued or they don't feel heard. And so I think, it's really great to be able to just talk simply about how we can connect people in this idea of a movement, and we can all start somewhere different, but inevitably, if we're going in the right direction, something that we started this year ourselves, I'll just throw it out there, was aligning with 1% for the planet. And I think, they're so great in that the accountability is built in. And so we've committed it's 1% of our gross revenue for the year. We'll go, we can contribute that to different environmental partner organizations, but then we can actually ask our clients that we're working with, hey, look, here's a few that are within the area. We're going to donate on your behalf. What would you like? And would you like to become a part? We can make them aware of what we're doing and kind of make it holistic and intentional and get excited about it. And you do have to report what you gave at the end of the day. So you can't say you're going to do it and not do it, because at the end of the day, your ledgers are going to be shared. So, I think that's one great step forward that we're trying to do here.
Amazing.
What I love about the thread, as I was listening to everyone talk, is this idea that all of us are moving away from thinking about measuring outcomes and measuring business simply on pure financial metrics. And when I started my career, I'm going to date myself, I finished an MBA about 25 years ago, so a long time. It was only ever about the financials. We talked a little bit about culture and organizational design, but it was really about driving to bottom line. And what has excited me so much in the last decade is that there's this movement and this realization that it's more than that. And even when I started my career and I started leading teams, this realization that really there's a bunch of relational dynamics as leaders in organizations that we need to manage. And the relational ones have a people partnership component, this idea of like, how do we show up and how do we work together? But there's also this purpose component, like, how is this work aligned and in service, not just to the team itself, but to the organization and to the community that the organization actually serves. Yeah. And then this idea that there's also a process component, like, how do we get the work done and how do we get it done in a way that's sustainable, not just for today, but if we're going 13 generations forward, are they going to still think it's sustainable? So I love that thread that I'm hearing from all of us, that we're widening how we talk about sustainability and impact and the work that we do.
When it comes in from the change mindset perspective and creating habits in the workplace, I'm super excited to hear everyone's thought processes around what does that mean? So when we're thinking about ESG, what type of models does this back into? And how do we know what to do in different demographics or workplaces or geographic locations when it comes to ESG? And how can we simplify this thing called ESG? Like, for me, coming into this, I'm super excited to debunk some of the stigma that's around ESG, that it has to be this big thing and done a certain way. Nancy said something that was really important in the green room earlier, and it's so much around spirit behind ESG and understanding that to have a sustainable organization, it's really about, how does my business and my people impact the environment? How do we, socially approach this? And Sin has a lot to say about, the diversity, equity, and inclusion side of things. It's not just about that. It's also the the competency around culture is shifting, and what's happened in past is no longer acceptable. It needs to shift, and that's the social side of things. And then the governance piece. I mean, that's all the way from your investors or your board all the way down to how you're looking to do procurement within your organization and who you're working with. And so I'm super, super excited to really turn the mic over to everyone to identify. Maybe we could go to the place of how do you identify what you need to do as an organization when it comes to ESG? Like, how do you unpackage that? What are your thoughts?
At the risk of always being first, just something that you said, and I just can't help myself. I hope it's okay if I just kind of launch in.
Jump in, Nancy.
Something that you said, you couldn't be more right. A lot of companies, and especially like let's say small and medium-sized companies, they may look at this and go, "Ooh, this is a lot. I don't know how to even start to wrap my arms around this conversation. So I'm just going to hold back and wait until something forces me to do so."
Because you see a lot of that, right? Like we're all working with mid-sized businesses, some large businesses, and ESG is an overwhelming topic. You're right. Keep going.
Yeah, no, for sure. And so what we're starting to see now is so where this whole conversation started is it started to push down from the investment community. So the investment community was saying, we need a more holistic way to start to assess the companies within our portfolios, and not to go down to this nerdy accounting conversation. I'll keep it up here. But that's where it started, because investors realized if we don't know what other issues or factors might be hiding sort of around the corner, we can't really assess the future financial performance of these companies. So from that, a lot of the publicly traded companies have started to adopt ESG practices and starting to push that throughout their supply chain. So everything starts to trickle down. So companies that said, I can't get my arms around this, now they have no choice, because some of their largest customers might be requiring them to start reporting on certain issues and certain factors. Quite often they're done sort of in piecemeal. Okay, we need you to start focusing on this or this. So it's not done in a holistic way, but then it's highly reactive, right? So now what we've got are these international sustainability standards that just went through a Canadian consultative process, because we have now Canadian sustainability standards that will be, ideally building off of what the international sort of baseline has already come out with, and I expect that we will. And so as early as January of next year, we may indeed see Canadian sustainability standards being applied to large publicly traded companies here in Canada. That will also be another important piece of all of this, because that's when you start getting the regulatory bodies involved. So now everybody understands what we're working in. Here's the framework. If you're in this industry, this is what we expect you to report on. But again, that's just from one element. You still need to go deeper. You still need to look at your own organization. You still need to look at your own variables. Standards will only go so far. They set a really, really important a set of table stakes and a really important foundation. But every company's different. Every set of circumstances are different. And that's where we get in these bigger conversations, and how do you manage that? How do you make sure that this can be truly integrated? So yeah.
I like where you're going with that, Nancy. Two things come up for me is, one is, okay, cool. This is coming from VCs or investors, and that's going to hit a lot of our tech companies, larger conglomerates, federal, national governments, et cetera. But what about the mom and pop shops? And what about the majority of, because I know that the majority of companies in Canada are either solopreneurs or partnerships, right? So how do we impart or be a conduit to ESG for the smaller companies so that it's not just about compliance or complying by a bottom line?
Yeah.
And the question's for everyone. Yeah.
I love that. And I'm interested, Sin, what you're going to think about this, because we talked about small tools. But one of the things that I often think about with clients is how might we back into things where maybe ESG feels like this really big topic that I can't tackle as a leader. And one of the tools that we use in team coaching is just a team health check. And the difference from other kind of health checks that a team might do is it has an external in view of the team as well. So it's not just the team itself, but it's all of the places that the team touches, from teams that they work with within an organization, as well as vendors and partners, clients, customers, even future constituents. And this idea of helping the team start to say, like, how might we understand how others experience and view this team, and what do others think is really important for our focus? And then that data, as it gets shared with the team, starts to drive, like, are we aligned in our purpose? Are we aligned in our values to what all of our constituents actually need from us? And that's by no means like the end, but it's a great starting point to help the team start to think outside of itself and really what's its work in service of, the value that it's creating, what's it in service of.
Couldn't agree more. I love all of what you're saying there, Mel, in the sense of, just layering off of the in service of. And so within organizations, it's looking at, what is our interest? Maybe we have more interest in the social side than we do governance, or the environmental side because of where we're at. And that's okay, but we also need to pay attention to the other acronym portions of it, right? And the other thing that's coming up for me is getting curious about, as an organization, how can we foster the thought process that it's up to us collectively to really have sustainability, whether it be with your people, environment, or from a governance perspective. And it should be our responsibility or our accountability to not just comply, but show interest in your own way. And what I mean by that is, as a small business, you can certainly, donate back to your community. You can certainly check in with regards to what type of providers you're utilizing to ensure that they are environmentally compliant. And the governance side of it, well, that's why we have accountants, right? So as for small businesses, but it's really looking at it, I think, within our own company lens, and then identifying accountabilities so that it doesn't feel like this big monstrous thing that we need to attack and do it correctly do it 100% out of the gate. What's everyone's thoughts around that?
If I could share a little, it's last week I was actually in Guelph for my daughter's university graduation, and the keynote, the inspirational talk, it led in with, I grew up, my parents are boomers, and of what the boomer generation is leaving these new graduates, and what, what they're going to have to contend with, and what, kind of optimism they can bring with them and what they can do, and bringing it back into that idea of the shift that needs to happen. So I'm a parent of a trans child, and that's why I'm the only cis person at the company, but I recognize that the systems that are in place in public and private sector weren't prepared to support them, and wanted to use my business experience to help create space, but also not take up space at the same time. And so, but I recognize it takes a village. It takes a village. So because no matter how much I tried, and even advocating and volunteering and nonprofit work, I couldn't shift a needle, and make a difference without realizing it has to come from everybody, and businesses have to be engaged, and they have to recognize, but how do you do that without shame and without guilt? And how do you recognize that we're all in this space right now, and it takes all of us, working together, if we want to be sustainable and profitable and thrive, but also have, clean water that we can drink, and trees, and diverse ecosphere. And so I think, learning, we need to unlearn these bad habits, and we go into it from a perspective of like, it's okay. We've been taught this, there's a lot of things that we've grown up and we believe this, but we're realizing now it's not the right way. And that's okay, taking that shame out of it. But what can we do? It's not what can't we do, but what can we do to make a difference? One other little example of what we're doing, and we've just literally put this in place, but I was involved with the Halifax Chamber of Commerce Business Awards this year. And something that they did, I absolutely loved. And I said, we're going to do this because why not? And the idea of we really always want to connect with the Two-Spirit community and in the spirit of truth and reconciliation, how can we bridge, that and do our part? And what we decided in mirroring something that they did is looking at economic truth and reconciliation. And so we're a portion of all of our training-based work now, we're going to donate again to a local Two-Spirit or Indigenous nonprofit community. And something that we thought of, which they had done, was they connected with a group of Indigenous artists. And so we're looking at purchasing art from them, and then also being able to connect the company that we're working with that art, with that artist. And so it's something that they can also connect with, and put up in their hallway and talk about, well, we worked with this company that connected me, but they can learn more and hopefully adopt those practices too. So it's just kind of those little starting the conversation, I guess, like let's talk about it and not being overwhelmed.
I heard 3 golden nuggets there. Thank you.
I did too.
Yeah. And so for me, what I was hearing was it's really adopting as an organization collectively the learning mindsets. And secondly, having no fear to unlearn old habits and relearn new habits that back into things like ESG. And finally, as a smaller organization, you can make small decisions in who you are utilizing as suppliers or donating from a community standpoint or bringing into your quote unquote corporate circle to ensure that it's in alignment with your core values and your strategy. Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah. I also heard the grace over guilt idea, right? Like, let's just start anywhere. And I was thinking someone said that in the green room before we started. And it came up for me as you were saying that, just start.
If I may, sorry, go ahead, Nancy.
Oh, I was just so, and Ange, something that you just said that sort of highlighted something that Cynthia touched on as well. When you were just talking about, as a small business, you can be very purposeful in the decisions that you make, but also when we look at it sort of from that ESG lens and that traditional way, we say like it provides a competitive advantage for an organization that does embrace an ESG strategy in that purposeful way by understanding, by going out to their stakeholders, finding out what's important, being able to find out what matters to those who matter most to me as a business owner or as a company, right?
Competitive advantage, yes.
Yeah, so employees are going to choose where they want to work because of the practices that they have in place and how they do respect the environment and the people and all that sort of thing, right? All those really important factors. So if you know what's most important, you can start to embrace that and integrate that, again, beyond just, are we making money? Right. And companies haven't just focused on just making money, but primarily that's how we tend to look at what are your quarterly results? What are your annual results? What's your, 5-year forecast looking like?
Yeah. What are your OKRs? Did you hit your rocks? Yeah.
Now it's changing. Now we're starting to look at it more holistically. Sorry, Carrie Ann, what were you going to say?
Yeah, we want to hear from you, Carrie Ann.
No, I appreciate that. This is all so excellent. Just in the spirit of smaller businesses, medium-sized businesses, and the idea of ESG. I referenced the word symptoms when I spoke earlier, and sometimes I find it really helpful, when I talk to organizations, the idea of ESG might sound too big for me. Like it's such a big concept, it's such a big, broad, and we're also kind of learning that when you use the acronym, sometimes that people think I'm just a small business. So I like to tackle it in terms of, but is your small business or medium-sized, whatever business, facing issues attracting talent, retaining talent, customer service, engagement, lack of it within your team, lack of it within your community. Are you stagnant in your growth? Do you have inconsistent marketing? Can you not measure your ROI of your marketing? Do you have inconsistent decision making?
That sounds like a checklist we should send out afterwards. This is awesome, Carrie Ann. Seriously.
Is there internal conflict? So I just feel like the idea of being practical, ESG is not this big grand thing that only happens for big companies. This is something that is likely impacting your business right now in your day-to-day. And often the dialogue is, we don't have time for that, or we can't, but actually it's the very thing that can solve some of these very practical issues.
I like where you're going with that, Carrie Ann, and it's touching on this whole concept of personal accountability when it comes to ESG. So do we have any examples of how personal accountability can be seen or taught within organizations of any size?
I can definitely, it's most recently something that we engaged in companies. So I find the most simplistic way to incorporate anything and any question that I have on how do I go forward with myself or any of our clients is going back to your core values as your business. And no matter what size you are, that's what you should be starting with. I know a lot of people are like, oh, I'm not, no, your core values is where you should start because that's where your decision making should come from. So I follow Traction and Gina Wickman. So you must always hire, fire, review, reward, and recognize with your core values in mind. If you're already doing that, and then you have the internal people happening that are supporting the core values of your company. Some people have asked me before, are your core values for your business the same as your core values for your person? I personally believe they should be very much aligned. And therefore, if you go back and you go internally and you ask your employees and you're curious with your employees and the values there, what's important to them and what they want to support, you can then in return have the whole company support those things. I have an employee who works or lives 4.5 hours away in Sydney, Nova Scotia. The culture there is very different than the culture right in Halifax, Nova Scotia. And when I asked her what was important to her, it was not what I expected as far as where did she want to give back, what could we do to give back, and what was happening in Sydney and what was very important. You know, I had no idea until I asked and I was curious. We talked about that a lot in the green room as well. It's just being curious on the conversation. So I think that's a great way to bring it within. Hopefully you already have people that are supporting the same values anyway in your organization, and then asking them, bringing it full circle that way.
Definitely. Going out at like 600,000 feet, I read an article where Patagonia actually put a call out for employee accountability around ESG. And what they come up with collectively is the Worn and Wear program. And essentially, in a nutshell, you know, anything that's used t-shirt, etc., they will repair the clothes and then resell at a discounted price. So there can be small things like that within organizations, big or mid-size, that can contribute to the environmental or social or governance side of things, for sure.
And something too, we're seeing a real shift as well towards, I guess, building on what Charlene had started to talk about too, is this building an accountability around some of these non-financial metrics across organizations through performance management plans or even compensation policies. So really trying to look at, so instead of, did you meet your sales target? There's other factors. And again, not just randomly selected for environmental or social issues, but those that tie back to their ESG strategy. Because again, it's really important to always come back to what's most important and what matters most to the company from an ESG lens. So you really need to go with that materiality sort of assessment process. Standards can help, but there's a lot of great tools for that. But at the end of the day, it's how do you get that accountability within the organization and you really make it part of the performance management plans. So whether that's tied to compensation, whether that's tied to other objectives, but it really is part of that. So every employee, just like you would, if you had any variable components or how you would assess somebody in their, whether it be annual or quarterly performance appraisals, what have you done to help address some of these key metrics that we've set to be able to measure our performance around these environmental, social, and governance issues. So that way everyone understands their role in that and being able to get that success.
I also think that there's accountability at the leadership level, because we can have and just kind of building off of what you're saying, Nancy, it's fantastic to have policies in place and fantastic to have performance reviews in place to avoid it being check boxes and signature pages. It's ensuring that the leadership understands the expectations of their accountabilities. And what I mean by that is communicate. So it's communicating, where are we shifting to from an ESG perspective, that one thing, that 1%. And then it's re-communicating. And then it's asking team members what's getting in your way if they're not doing it based on a performative measure perspective, and how can we do better? So I really think that communication is a huge key here in assisting with regards to that unlearning piece and then relearning from a habitual perspective, because you know what it's like. And I think that this will resonate with everyone. You sign a policy and then what happens? It goes in your drawer or it's in that electronic file. Your performance review, you might check on it a couple times a year, but it's not sustainable in the sense of getting me to, I'm just using me as an example, getting me to move towards thinking about environmental friendly operations, or how am I making sure that my company is going paperless, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there's a build off to that in the sense of, yes, let's layer groundwork around performance and policy, and then how can we implement this from a cultural perspective, starting with the leadership team?
Yeah, if I could build on that, one of the things that that I've noticed with leadership teams is that intentionality of like, how do we bring this in every time we're together? And some of the strategies that we've used is had clients actually define, a leadership team define their purpose as a leadership team. Like, why are they there? Why do they exist? What does the organization need them to do?
Yeah.
And then from that, they actually bring that forward into every meeting when they start. It's on their agenda, like their template, what their mission and purpose is as a leadership team. And so building off of what Nancy said as well, like that could then also tie to ESG goals as well, so that you have this full circle moment and this intentionality that you're constantly reminding yourself of it, so it doesn't, Ange, to your point, become this thing that you tick off and move forward. Sid, I think you were going to jump in.
Oh no, I love that, and you kind of like just parried on what I was going to say. But the idea of like you have to show up as well, so you can't send your team off to say, okay, we're going to go and we're going to volunteer at the food bank and we're going to do this, and have nobody from the top leadership executives show up. And often when clients find us, it's because there's been something that's gone wrong. Like it's because it's reactionary and is not being preventative. It's not being intentional. And, then to be able to say, okay, sure, we can do a workshop and we can help with a strategy. But if you don't have that top leadership showing, people know, they see it, your teams feel it. And so you really do have to create something that everybody can participate in and then communicate it. And the other thing I was going to say when you mentioned policies, and Mel, often we'll do like a pre-workshop survey, temperature check. It's done independently. It's anonymous, which is great. So you get like good information. But literally 99% of the time when we ask, do you know where your policies are? Could you find them? No, people answer no, they don't know where they are. So they're, buried somewhere in HR, when a simple link on your website to them so people can access them easily is all you need to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
One of my favorite one-liners is that you can't mandate culture, right? It's something that has to be, and you can't mandate positivity. You can't, like, these are things that you have to inspire, and you inspire that by, as Angie said earlier, good communication. And yeah, so if you want to, inspire this, you have to identify your values, but also understand how to communicate them in a way that's impactful. And also I find it really helpful to use the values in everyday language. So I too am familiar with tracks, and Charlene, when you were talking about core values, I was nodding and agree with all of that, and have failed miserably at times personally around implementing them on an ongoing basis. But I've also felt the feeling of being so empowered when I've been aligned with those. And adopting those in everyday culture or everyday language has been really helpful around, decision making, and are we making the right decision here? Are we, and just asking the question, that's a really good question. Tell me what core value that aligns with. So let's pull them out and let's use them. Like, should we do this or not do this? Or should we donate here or not? Or should we, from the social perspective, it's just tell me what core value that aligns with. And then you start to really integrate it into the overall culture.
I like where you're going with that.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Of course.
Yeah, I'm just curious because, like, when Charlene, when you said about like you're in Sydney and you're working with clients there, like when you're working like right across the country, coast to coast to coast, you've got different cultures. So how do you pull ESG into place? Say if you are like a national organization where your individual locations are very different, like how can you have one policy? Like how can you do that impactfully?
Char, did you want to go?
I mean, I think, and again, I'm not national, but for me, that on a small scale was from here to Sydney, and just asking her so if you're on the large scale, just continuing to include, the aspects and the information that comes from the entire organization. So just including them, being inclusive and curious to all of, and then I know when we worked with Nova Scotia Power, it would change based on what the feedback was and what was, we just didn't keep one organization at the spotlight of everything. You continued to move through. So then you're highlighting, and there's awareness, and continuing education on different things. For me, that's how you would go nationally. Now, I would love to hear how some others would see that as well.
Well, if I could just try, sorry, Ange.
It's okay, Nancy. You go ahead. I'll go last.
So when you look at it from ESG, and that's why the strategy is so important, and looking at it in a holistic way, because we've worked with multinational firms, so across different continents and time zones. So what it is, and I sometimes it's almost harder when you're talking Sydney and Halifax, right? Because it doesn't seem like it should be so different, but it is. We run into this all the time in Atlantic Canada. Maybe some priorities or some concerns might be different, in Newfoundland, PEI, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia. So it's being aware of that. Yeah. But if you know what your priority areas are, and if you know what you're trying to achieve, and if you have metrics and goals and a plan to get there, how you go about it in different jurisdictions, whether it be in Singapore and Halifax, or Cape Breton and Charlottetown, it's just about how it comes to fruition. But if you have your eye on that goal, and you know what you're trying to achieve and what it looks like when you get there, or what those interim targets are, which are so important. I mean, there's too many of these 2050 net zero strategies out there with absolutely no interim targets to get there. But if you actually know, then yeah, you might go about it a little bit differently. But it's kind of now I'm getting into your guys' space, so sorry to get ahead, but
it's okay.
It's kind of like whenever you're managing people. Not everyone is going to have the same approach of how to get there, but if you all know what your commonality is and what you're working toward, then, that's where the richness starts to happen. So I'm getting down a whole other path that I don't have the expertise to talk about, but going back to ESG, that's how it can be applied.
I can pick it up and run with it, Nancy, because the word that I'm hearing circling in my mind is allowance for microcultures. So it's agreeing around, okay, what's our policy, what's our practice, what are we going to do? And then allowing to have the microcultures just organically arise to, maybe they practice differently with the same outcome, essentially is where we would get to. And HR has struggled with this. I would say national HR has struggled with this for years, and even more so now with hybrid working and international work. It's how do you ensure that there's that even proverbial playing field, even when there's sometimes thousands of differences across the board. And so I think it's really, really important that it comes down to open communication, allowing those microcultures, and ensuring that there's continuous updates. To Nancy's point, we're not waiting till 2050 to unpack or debrief on something. It should be monthly, if not weekly, to Carrie Ann's point earlier, to ensure that it stays intentional.
I love that.
Yeah.
I think, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, the micro, but like hovering around those core values, it makes sense. Because we did just a really simple experiment one day where I just said to someone who's working with us, who's a part of the trans non-binary community, I said, I want you to pick up the phone and phone every different bank branch that you can in the area here in Nova Scotia. And as a trans person, I want you to ask them and say, I'm a trans person. I want to open up an account, and my legal name hasn't been updated. And I'm wondering what protections you have in place. What would it look like if I walked into your branch? And certain financial institutions did better than others, but nobody knew. Like, everybody said, well, I'm not sure. I have to go ask someone. Let me put you on hold. Oh, we treat everybody the same. Like, nobody had a good answer. And yet we look at the financial institutions that say, we've got this, we're doing well. They're at the front of the parade. They've got, the posters up, and it's like, no, we've got EDI under control. And it's kind of understanding that you've got to look where you might need it more. And how can you be consistent where you need to be consistent, front facing, people interacting with the community.
That's fair. Absolutely. And so when it comes to navigating the ever evolving changes of ESG with leaders, what could we say to them to help support leaders out there that are listening?
Start. First thing that comes to mind. Just start. I think this group has talked about just start small, but start.
I would echo that with a magnaphone if I could. Magnaphone, is that right? Yeah. But yeah, I mean, we've been talking about, like, in the conversation around ESG and sustainable business practices, and the fact that, you know, I mean, I'm sitting here just outside of Halifax, and we are experiencing today and tomorrow a heat wave. Like, it could feel like 40 degrees in June. This is different. So we do indeed have this form of a climate crisis that causes us to start to think about the environment differently. When we saw what happened since COVID and the social issues that got brought to the forefront, these are issues that we've been sweeping under a rug for decades, if not many, many more years than that. And so you're exactly right, Mel. We just have to start. No, we won't get it right. No company's going to get it right. Even those organizations that have massive resources to focus on this and who have been at it for, 10, 20 years in some ways, they will still say, we're still on the journey. And so start, be open, be transparent about what you do well and what you don't do well, be balanced, but just to be open and transparent. There's just a whole, blanket of greenwashing. Ooh, what if we overstate, or what if we say something? What if we're going to be called to task? Just be authentic, open, transparent, and start. Right. That's where I get passionate. I'm going to stop now, but that's what it's all about, right? Yeah.
It really is. And I think, to your point, it's having companies understand that there isn't a perfect vision at this point in time, one, and two, it's asking companies what type of actions can we operate within, meaning what type of education do we need? Or is it intensive training? Is it coaching? Is it mentorship? What type of external providers do we need to assist us with regards to operations and looking at our systemic practices to ensure that it's in alignment with what we're doing with ESG, and making sure that we're consistently refining. I think since mentioned that earlier, where it's something that is a continuous journey, and we're all not going to get it correctly out of the gate, as long as we're, what I would say as a coach, moving that 1%, month over month or quarter over quarter. I have one more question. Oh, go ahead.
No, I would just think I would challenge anyone listening to, walk away with thinking about where do you hold power? We all hold power somewhere. And what is one small change that you can make, today, whether it's a grocery purchase of something that is, environmentally sustainable, or whether it's looking at your cleaning product or where you work, if you're in a school, how, what can you do that'll be just one little thing that's more sustainable, that you could have an impact on the people around you and inspire them, and just start there.
Thank you so much, Lynn. That's powerful. On that note, thank you everyone for your time today, and I can't wait to see you all again. Have a great time.
Thanks for listening to the Human Side of Business podcast. I'm glad you could join us. If you enjoyed today's episode and want to stay updated with our latest content, make sure to visit our website. The link can be found in the episode description, where you can subscribe to the podcast, sign up for our newsletter, and learn more about our whole person leadership services. Sounds interesting? Explore the Whole Person Leadership Cohort by Intuity Performance, a unique program that offers unparalleled support to managers on every step of their leadership journey. Our program features evidence-based assessments, workbooks, group coaching, and interactive learning experiences to help you level up your leadership skills. Reach out today to apply to one of our upcoming cohorts. Until next time, take care and stay curious.